Welcome back, everyone. This is the My Aggie Nation podcast. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle. Over there, Alex Miller with the Eagle at the Eagle home base. We're also joined by co-host, one of the founding fathers of the My Aggie Nation podcast, Zach Taylor, WTAW. What's going on, boys?
Nothing much. Founding father makes me sound really old.
I mean, you are almost legitimately, literally a father. So
yeah, almost getting there. So
for those of you who are watching this on the eagle.com video, Zach is having some technical difficulties with his webcam. So we'll just see his bright, shining, smiling face and his profile avatar here.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is with it. It has worked in the past. Maybe I have to fire it up before I come onto the Zoom. So either that or unplug it and plug it back in. That usually works.
Like when we go to watch A&M football practice in spring and fall, we mostly get to see about 20 minutes of stretching, stretching and calisthenics. Maybe your webcam just needs some stretching and calisthenics.
That's what it is. Needs some stretching, some OTA type stuff.
Former A&M strength coach Mark Hockey needs to tell it it's a beautiful day. Anyway, we'll move on. A big thanks to Paul Batista from A&M Sports Management Department, and he also works with some of the legal aspects with the A&M Athletics Department. Thank you so much for him joining us and breaking that down a little bit. And in kind of a recap, yes, NCAA versus Alston ruling came down earlier this week. It said in the narrow scope of looking at compensation rules that the NCAA has against, the NCAA giving grad students some monetary, some financial aid for grad school or for getting a computer or anything that is deemed educational purposes. Schools can now provide that to athletes based on this ruling. It also gives the NCAA the power to rule what is something for educational purpose or not. But as Paul said in his interview, it's really Justice Kavanaugh's concurring opinion that raised eyebrows when he, in kind of summarizing in layman's terms, said, yeah, we were only asked to look at this narrow part of compensation rules, but try us, bring some more lawsuits in towards the rest of the NCAA's competition rules, because we found in this narrow gap that they were in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, and it'll probably be ruled in the plaintiff's favor again moving forward if there's more lawsuits coming. That being said, if more lawsuits come and they try to challenge the ability of schools to pay players, period, for what they do on the field, it's sounding like the Supreme Court would rule in favor of the players. Now, Paul said there at the end of his interview that he hopes Congress steps in and says, okay, yes, we'll give you a little bit of antitrust exemption legally so that you do need to compensate these players in certain ways, but we're not going to make this full-on professional sports. How do y'all see, if more of these lawsuits come and the rulings seem to go that way, do you see the ability to maintain college athletics and as close to the way that we know and love them, but also not be in violation of legal precedent?
Yeah.
Alex, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. I think one of the most practical things would just be finally having the ability to pay for stuff that's the full cost of attendance of school. Like you said, paying for a laptop. I mean, these days, if you're in college and you don't have a laptop, you're in trouble. I mean, especially this last year when you consider everything went online. I mean, it was Zoom University, basically. If you didn't have a laptop, that was probably pretty problematic for you. And so having the ability to pay for something like that, you think about the ability to pay for things such as housing or food. These dining centers, they provide meals all the time, but they're not open 365 days a year. The Bright Building is great. I've eaten up there as a student. And
Humble brag.
Yeah, there's wonderful food up there. Probably better food for the football players. But at the end of the day, it's not open year round. And how many times do we hear stories of players that are sleeping in their car or basically homeless? I mean, you can allow this to provide ways where players aren't in those situations anymore, where, you know, they're in an apartment or a house and being able to pay rent on time and not have to stress about that financial burden. And so, yeah, I think that the most practical way is to cover full cost of attendance, where maybe you haven't had a lot of leeway in those extra things that are needed, that, you know, everyone else has the ability to go work a 40-hour job a week so that you have food on the table and you have a roof over your head every single night.
Yeah. So, and clarification on that, in 2014, the NCAA did pass legislation that technically covered quote unquote full cost of attendance. What you're saying is going beyond into
Right.
the educational extras, like a laptop, but again, that's going to be part of the conversation too, because as Paul said, and as they mentioned in some of these hearings, that, okay, well, is a car, if there's no means of transportation, is a car an educational benefit that's permissible because the kid can't get to class, or a bike or a scooter or something like that? It's going to be interesting to see how those are defined. But I agree, it is a good step in the right direction to say that if the kid needs a whole bunch of lab equipment, or needs can't necessarily go to grad school without some form of academic financial aid, that they would have the ability to provide that. Zach, what do you think?
Well, I think you bring up a good point whenever it comes to kind of a slippery slope. At what point does this stop? At what point does it start? You know, can you get by in class without the use of all of these extras of laptops? You know, for me, I know that whenever I went to A&M, I never had a parking pass. So I never drove my vehicle onto campus. I always took the bus. Now, you know, obviously schedules make for difficulties. I didn't have football practice that I had to go to all the time, but you know, these guys are, especially in the football realm, are allotted a lot of things already, at least at Texas A&M. Now, is that to say that it's that way across the board? I don't think so, especially when you're not talking about big time programs. But, you know, these guys do have access to tutoring. They have access to learning centers. They have access to computer systems. So what will be allowed and what will be allotted underneath this? And once, like you said, once you start going down that road, at what point do you stop? Because you could say, well, a car is needed for me to become the best student that I can be, you know, and an unpaid internship or things of that sort. Now, I do think that players should be allowed and afforded to work jobs if they need to. I know that time constraints really makes that difficult, but you know, in order to make the kind of extra cash that they want. But, you know, as far as living expenses and stuff, a lot of these guys do get free room and board. Not to say that it's that way across the board. A lot of them choose to live off of campus, but I don't think it's, you know, Alex brought up about guys sleeping in cars and stuff. And maybe those are stories that I just haven't caught on to. I remember, what was it, Shabazz Napier, who played basketball for UConn back in the day, talked about how he went to bed hungry. You know, didn't have the right allotment of snacks and things of that sort. Without having been within the UConn program, I don't know if that was really true or not. But at least from viewing things at Texas A&M, you know, these guys are given a lot. So I am wondering what will be covered that is not already covered. And I know laptops was brought up, you know, paying for study abroad programs and different things of that sort. But it seems like all the tools that student athletes need to become good students and to get their academics done and completed are already allotted for them, and everything that they need to have in order to have that college experience in living and different things like that. It seems like that's already in place. Maybe y'all are noticing something different. I don't know.
I mean, I think it depends school by school. I think that I think a lot of the focus of this lawsuit necessarily has to do with the graduate student experience, because there was some things that weren't necessarily covered under compensation things. When you become a grad student, it mostly encompassed undergrad students. So I think a lot of that had to do with more grad school related things. Here's the long and short of it. The NCAA having to compensate players for their achievements on the athletic field is coming. That was very, very clear in Justice Kavanaugh's concurring opinion of the NCAA v. Alston case. He basically said, we were asked to rule on this narrow scope of compensation rules of the NCAA that had to do with graduation that had to do with educational benefits. But if anyone else wants to bring any lawsuits forward about this kind of related stuff, try us, because we've already shown that the NCAA is in violation of the Sherman Act. The Sherman Act, of course, saying that you can't corporations, companies can't come together, form a monopoly, and then start to price fix either both the products that they make or the labor that they employ. And so NCAA is the only game in town. They have a monopoly on college athletics as far as the level of competition that they want to bring forth. So they already kind of have a monopoly in that sense. And to say that they're going to charge, that they want players to play for the love of the game, and that's what makes college athletics what it is illegal under the Sherman Antitrust Act. What moving forward, Batista said was that now it's up to Congress to pass some kind of legislation to see if they can give them partial antitrust exemption, so that there's ways to legislate the kind of compensation that these athletes will be able to get, and to let them unionize and collectively bargain in that sense, so that they can agree to the kind of compensation that they get to keep some level of what everyone likes to say is amateur status, as the court ruled that amateur status means nothing. It's like saying, if you're a actually Justice Kavanaugh said in his opinion, it's like if you're a newspaper and you tell journalists the reason why we want you to work for us is because you do it for the love of public service. And that's what makes our newspaper the best. You can't do that. You have to compensate your people there's another fine line of if athletes are employees or not. And you can debate that one way or another, but you can't argue the fact that these universities, these athletic departments, and these bowls, tournaments, everything else are making billions of dollars on the backs of these athletes. So it's going to have to come down to Congress eventually to rule how much antitrust exemption that the NCAA is going to get. But all that being said, when it comes down to it, it's only a matter of the next lawsuit making it to the Supreme Court, whether we get a whole new box of worms on what the future of college athletics is going to be.
Well, and you made mention of making all of these billions of dollars, and that is absolutely true when it comes to college football. But what about other sports? I mean, you're talking about women's swimming and diving. If you're talking about universities compensating athletes, and I'm not talking about for name, image, and likeness, I'm talking about just in general paying athletes to perform for them, it's going to be very different in football compared to women's swimming and diving or men's lacrosse or what have you. Those are not going to make nearly as much money as the football players will. And so where I think there's going to come a day where a line is drawn in the sand, and this is going to be a difficulty that a lot of universities are going to have to maneuver through, is whenever those sports that don't make as much money, well, they want their cut of the pie too, right? They say, well, I'm out there, I'm working just as hard, I'm practicing just as hard, I'm devoting just as much time as, say, these football players are, but I'm not making as much money as they are. And will there be people that kind of understand, okay, football is the biggest draw, men's basketball is the biggest draw? Yes. But will there be people that want to be paid just as much? Absolutely. And I think they're going to bring that forward. I think that's going to be a real problem that universities are going to have to address later on down the road.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be an interesting one. I mean, what the rule that the Supreme Court is basing this off of is the free market economy that America works under. And there is a price for every certain kind of labor. And I think that if we're going to veer really hard into the fact that this is a legal matter that has to do with free market capitalism, some people would say, well, yes, football brings in more money, so you're probably going to pay football players or compensate them better than college athletes. I guess it gets iffy there when you start looking at Title IX restrictions, right. But that more has to do with the education. It's what we're seeing here is once these next few lawsuits come through, there's going to be a massive overhaul of the legislation rulings that govern higher education, and especially in terms of how it relates to college athletics, because the Supreme Court found that it is in violation of the Sherman Act, at least in this narrow scope. let's move on. I know that's probably a bunch of people have a lot of headaches, and we're definitely not economists or poli sci majors over here. So let's get some breakdown something a little bit simpler. Alex, this weekend, the big 7-on-7 tournament, high school football here in Bryan College Station will take place at Veterans Park Tuesday through Saturday, and there's a plethora of A&M commits that are expected to make their trip down here to the area to take part in that. Real quick, let's Alex give us a little bit of a brief overview of what 7-on-7 is, and then we can talk a little bit more about who are some of those top A&M commits that you're expected to see this weekend. And I'll go ahead and start it off prefacing and saying me and Alex did a big old breakdown of the state 7-on-7 tournament on the Brazos Sports Prepcast, which you can also find on your podcast player of choice. So if you want a little further breakdown of the tournament itself, go over there and check that out. But Alex, take it away.
Yeah, the state 7-on-7 tournament is back this weekend at Veterans Park here in College Station. Didn't get to play last year because of the pandemic, but they got 3 divisions back this year. And, you know, A&M commits, they're going to be found in the Division I tournament. It's a 64-team bracket. Going to play pool play, 3 games Friday, bracket play, single elimination on Saturday. Hometown teams, A&M Consolidated, they're the defending state champions. Almost said national champions. But 7-on-7, it's pretty self-explanatory. You got 7 players on one side, 7 on the other. And it's touch football. It's played on a 45-yard field. There's 3 different zones that are each 15 yards. First 2 zones, you have 3 downs to get a first down. That final zone, the goal to go zone, it is 4 downs to score a touchdown. Games are 30 minutes long with 2 15-minute halves, which is actually new this year. It used to be 40-minute games with 2 20-minute halves, but they've shortened it down. And so, yeah, A&M, they've got several high-profile commits. Probably the biggest name out there A&M commit-wise is going to be Connor Wigman, A&M's 5-star quarterback commit, class of 2022. He plays out at Bridgeland High School in Cypress and committed to A&M earlier this year. I want to say it was January or February, not only in football, but he's going to be playing baseball too. He's one heck of a shortstop. But yeah, he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. You know, he's kind of a dual threat guy, you could say, can run the ball, but obviously this is 7-on-7. So this is going to be passing only. So if you want to see the arm talent of the future of A&M football, you can go check out Connor Wigman. One game I think that you'll want to keep an eye on if you're watching him, definitely going to be their pool game against DeSoto. DeSoto, notorious powerhouse up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so they're facing them Friday. I want to say it's at 1:45 p.m. Don't know which field, but you can check online for that. One of the other guys to keep an eye on, definitely going to be Donovan Green. He's a 4-star tight end commit. He's from Dickinson High School, also the home of Jalen Watermeyer, A&M's current tight end, trying to kind of follow in the same footsteps as Jalen is. But Donovan Green, he's going to be a tough guy to guard. I mean, he's a big-bodied dude. Not sure if this guy's going to make it down, but if he does, the one guy who might be able to guard him is Wiley East's Anthony James, who's A&M's only 2023 commit. You know, he's kind of an edge rusher, linebacker, defensive end. Like I said, not too sure if he's going to be playing because 7-on-7, it's all skill guys. There's no linemen. You have one center, so there's one lucky lineman that normally gets to come. But, you know, a guy like Anthony James, who's more of an edge rusher, probably more athletic as the lineman goes, he might actually get a chance to come play in this thing because, you know, he's probably one of the better players on the team. And so, you know, Dickinson, they're going to be playing Wiley East in pool play Friday afternoon. That game's at 4:45, so that's definitely going to be a game to watch. Also playing for A&M, their newest commit, Martrell Harris of the Woodlands. He's a 2022 3-star linebacker. He's going to be out there. You know, A&M's got several key targets that will probably be out there, guys that they're recruiting. And so, you know, this is such a fun event. It's one of my favorite events to go to because it's the only time where you have football teams from all corners of the state. You think about El Paso, Rio Grande Valley. You know, you got Beaumont, Westbrook coming over, teams from the Panhandle. You got powerhouses in Dallas, Houston. You got the Westlakes and Lake Travises of the world. And then you got teams here in the Brazos Valley, you know, Franklin coming off state championship run, or state title game run, I should say. They did not win the state championship. But, you know, all corners, all classifications, all in one place, 3 days of football. It's a good little thing to get you going as summer kind of hits the thick of things before we get into the fall. And you know, this is a great way for teams to go and practice for what they're going to do in 11-man football.
Zach, did you ever play any 7-on-7 football back in your glory days?
No. I was pretty much a baseball guy in high school. So, you know, I mean, I followed the football team, but I didn't play a lot of football. That career ended for me in middle school. But, you know, from 7-on-7, it has just grown into this humongous thing. And it was around when I was in high school, but I don't recall it being nearly this big. And you get some, as Alex was saying, some of the best athletes in the state are coming. What's funny, and you guys actually, the Eagle put out an article about this, about Franklin. And so Franklin High School, powerhouse there in 3A, but it's been primarily a run team. I mean, for as long as anybody can remember. And Mark Fannin is their head football coach. Of course, took them to the state championship his first year. Now he's in his second year at the helm. But he's a primarily running coach as well. But they're in this 7-on-7 competition. They're going to be playing this week in the state championships. And he said a large part of that is, one, defensively, that helps prepare them for facing these spread offenses that they're going to be facing in the regular and postseason, because you're going to see a lot of these looks. And then offensively, your athletes get to kind of showcase their skills a little bit. They get to hone in on that athleticism that they might not otherwise be showing in a formed game plan that primarily revolves around the run. So it is kind of cool that you get all styles, because it seems like everybody nowadays is running the wide open offenses, right? Well, not everybody. And even the teams that aren't are still pretty dang good at 7-on-7. Good athletes are good athletes. So yeah, no, it'll be a lot of fun. And I'll be there in spirit with you guys as y'all are baking out there.
I believe, Alex, that was your story on Franklin, was it not?
It was.
There you go.
I thought it was written really, really well, so that's why. Yeah.
Some might say.
Let's move. Before we move on, Alex, let's just get a quick 20-second teaser on the story that's coming out tomorrow in Thursday's Eagle. So if you're listening to this in real time, it's tomorrow. If you're listening to this in the future, it's on Thursday's Eagle. A little bit on what you're working on for that.
Yeah, so, you know, one of the big storylines of this year's state 7-on-7 tournament, Adidas will not be sponsoring the tournament this year. So teams will be providing their own uniforms, jerseys, cleats, accessories. This is kind of a big deal, because one of the things that has become a marquee deal of the state 7-on-7 tournament is Adidas providing uniforms, cleats, gloves. I mean, several $100s, honestly, worth of gear to every single player that comes. They're not doing that this year. And so, you know, I got a chance to talk with the state 7-on-7 director about what went down with that. And, you know, I got to talk with coaches of, you know, is this disappointing for players? And also, you know, what the future holds, if there's a potentially future sponsor that could come for this event in the years to come.
Yeah, definitely check that out in Thursday's edition of the Eagle or on theeagle.com. Let's finish up with a little baseball, because it's always baseball season in the summer, and A&M has a new head coach in Jim Schlossnagle, who we've talked about previously on this podcast. But today it was announced that Michael Early of Arizona State will be hired on as A&M's new hitting coach. Jack Moss is also coming over, an infielder, first baseman from Arizona State, to follow his coach over. And it's expected that Thursday or later this week, Nolan Kane is going to be announced as the recruiting coordinator for the Aggies. He, of course, serving the past several years at LSU. Coach Schlossnagle rating a couple programs that are losing their head coaches or have lost their head coaches after this season. Michael Early is going to be an interesting one. If you look at Schlossnagle's last about decade at TCU, he had Coach Mosiello up there with him, who was a high octane, let's get runners on base, let's steal bases, let's move them around, let's put a lot of pressure on the defense kind of offense. And we asked Schlossnagle, he said, you want to have multiple ways to move runners around, multiple facets of offense. But it really seems like with Coach Early that the focus, what he did best is good slugging percentages with his teams. They've never been ranked higher than 54th in his last 4 years where he was the hitting coach. They, in fact, were as low as third in slugging percentage, slugging 519 in 2018. That was also the year that they were 10th in batting average in 310 and third in home runs with 94 when the season was all said and done. He helped raise Spencer Torkelson through the college ranks. He was a number 1 overall draft pick in 2020. What do y'all think about some of these hires, bringing some of these guys on in the direction that Jim Schlossnagle has gone in his first weeks on the job?
Well, I think bringing in Early, a little bit that I do know about him, I mean, it seems like that was a tremendous hire. I got to looking over the last 4 seasons, Arizona State, and again, this isn't the exact math just because the season last year was cut short because of COVID-19, but over 4 seasons, the team averaged a 290 batting average as a team. Led the entire nation in home runs. I believe they had 94 in 2019. So yes, he had some really talented guys. I don't want to take away from what they did individually, but the fact that he was able to really coach those guys up. You mentioned Spencer Torkelson. Hunter Bishop was another top 10 draft pick that came out of Arizona State that Early kind of helped go, or I should say kind of direct in his career. And another thing, too, is he's got the ringing endorsement of Nolan Arenado, who is an all-star third baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals, kind of all-world kind of guy, can do it, 5-tool player. But, I mean, he works with major league hitters as well. So it's not as if it's just, he's getting praise from guys that he's coached in the college ranks. He's got a lot of respect for major leaguers as well. I think that goes a long way with college kids.
Yeah. On Nolan Cain, a hire that's kind of impending, I think that's probably a pretty smart move by Schloss when you consider he hasn't coached in the SEC. So now your recruiting coordinator is a guy who's been entrenched in one of the best SEC programs under one of the best coaches, Paul Maneri, a guy that's coming over from LSU and kind of knows the lay of the land. It kind of reminds me of how when Jimbo Fisher came to A&M, one of the only 2 coaches he retained was Terry Price, a guy that knows A&M through and through, was a bona fide recruiter, guy that developed really good players. And so that kind of reminds me of that. And then, you think about a guy coming from Arizona State, maybe that can expand A&M's footprint a little bit. Obviously, they've got when you're here in College Station, you've got a really nice central area. You got guys from Houston, the Metroplex, just Texas in general. And then when you bring a recruiting coordinator from LSU, obviously you're going to get some connections and ties to the Southeast. But how about a guy over in Arizona who's probably recruited the likes of Arizona and California? I know TCU, they normally draw a lot of students from that West Coast area. So maybe you kind of see some of that national footprint expand a little bit while staying at home and building your core around kids from Texas. I mean, that kind of has been the formula for success for Jimbo Fisher on the football field. So maybe Jim Schlossnagle can replicate that to an extent on the baseball diamond.
Yeah, I'll be interested just to see how that roster continues to shake up. Of course, we mentioned Jack Moss, who's coming over from Arizona State. He is a guy that batted in his freshman year 299 and 154 at bat, 6 home runs, 29 RBIs, playing mostly first base. That's a little bit of, not quite the same, but a little bit of offensive production that could fill right in for Will Frizzell as he moves on to the next level. Guys, I think that's all the time we have this week. I appreciate y'all jumping on to break down this week in A&M athletics and talking about some real heady stuff for once. I think that was a little bit over our pay grade today, but appreciate y'all. For the listeners, we'll be back next week for another edition of this. So for Alex Miller and Zach Taylor, I'm Travis Brown. This is the My Aggie Nation podcast, and we'll see you next week.